Welcome back to the Buddhist Podcast. My name is Noah Cease, and today we're going to talk about something a little more abstract, namely the challenge of being alive, the challenge of being human, and what do we do about it? Today I'm definitely going to be leaning a little bit more heavily into both Buddhism and Christian theology. I think that this topic kind of has to go in those directions to some degree. Life is really, 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 really hard. And it's really, 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 really hard for pretty much anyone who's ever been alive. And somehow, people have this notion that it shouldn't be hard, that life should be easy, it should be comfortable, it should be, whatever, pick any other adjective that you want. And I don't really know where that comes from. I mean, I guess partially it comes from all the creature comforts that modern people are used to having. Warm home, comfy couch, warm fuzzy blankets and slippers and socks and all of these kinds of things. And I have plenty of those things. But this idea that your existence should be easy, that your life should go without challenge, without suffering, I don't know. I mean, sometimes it sounds nice, and there's certainly a degree of suffering that nobody can be expected to get through. But for the most part, for most people, I question the validity of wanting an easy life. And so here's where I'm going to kind of dive into some Christian theology and some Buddhist ideology as well. Both of them from the outset make no mistake that life is painful, it's sorrowful, and there's a seemingly endless amount of suffering. The first noble truth of Buddhism is that life is suffering, dukkha. This idea of kind of a wheel out of kilter. If you think about being in a car with a wobbly wheel or a shopping cart with a wobbly wheel, it's just constantly annoying. And so Buddhism makes it very, very clear, literally from the outset, that you need to get rid of this idea. You need to completely dislodge yourself from this notion that life should be easy. Life should be comfortable. And every single aspect of life, according to Buddhism, contains suffering within it. If we're happy, happiness doesn't stay around for very long, and so there's suffering in that. We get physically uncomfortable, and we suffer from that. We get mentally uncomfortable. Our thoughts drive us crazy. We get brokenhearted. We get ill. All of these things, we make expectations, we make plans, and they don't fall the way that we want them to, and so we suffer from that as well. So Buddhism goes very, very in depth into this and really sinks itself into this notion that you better get used to it. Life is suffering. Life's tough. There's always challenges. And with Christianity, and this is something I talk with quite a bit with my Christian clients. If we look at Jesus Christ as an exemplar, as a model of what, not only how to live, but what to expect in being alive. Jesus, as the perfect Son of God, he knew that he was going to suffer. He knew that by by being alive, he was going to incur massive amounts of pain and sorrow and loss, culminating in his own loss of life. And so even in the Gospels, you see this from the outset. Pain is inevitable. Sorrow is inevitable. And with Christianity, the implication is that to pursue that which is most important, to pursue the highest value that you possibly can, is to incur suffering all along the way. Now, there's a very practical reason for this, because anytime that you make a goal, anytime that you have something that you're pursuing, that inevitably means that there are going to be obstacles along the way. If you don't have an obstacle, or rather, if you don't have a goal, then there are no obstacles, because you have nothing to move toward. Therefore, nothing can move in front of you. And on a more spiritual level, and psychological level, that means that when you pick a target, you risk missing the target, and it doesn't feel good to miss the target. So Buddhism, just very very plainly and straightforwardly, outlines how all aspects of life contain suffering in them, and Christianity has this kind of both practical, spiritual, and psychological implication through the Gospels that if you're going to be alive, you're necessarily going to have certain targets that you're going to reach for. And by establishing targets, you're going to suffer along the way. Now, Buddhism's kind of remedy to this is also found in the Four Noble Truths, which is essentially don't want, don't aim. And so this is very, very contrary to Christianity. This idea that, okay, if you let go of your wanting, if you let go of your desires, then you attach yourself to nothing, and therefore you won't suffer. Now, there's a lot more intricacy and nuance into that argument, but we'll keep it at that for now. And Christianity takes the opposite stance, and it says, well, at least if you're aiming at something of value, and you find the ultimate value, like Jesus's ultimate value was to spread the word of God, to save people. That's a pretty high value. And so the message in Christianity is, when you pick that thing that is of ultimate value, then your suffering isn't without purpose. Your suffering isn't without meaning. And again, you see this reflected in the Gospels that, yes, Jesus gets beaten and spat on and cursed and betrayed. He suffers all the worst that are in human beings. And ultimately, he dies on the cross. But, and this is a very important, very large but, he rises again. So he dies in the service of something so profoundly meaningful that he comes back. And whether or not you want to take this literally as he is rewarded with the kingdom of heaven and returning to his Father, or as a metaphor, a psychological transformation, that when you die to the thing that is of your absolute highest value, then you transcend the suffering that you incurred along the way. In other words, the meaning, there's meaning to your suffering. And essentially that the suffering itself is okay. It's manageable because you are in pursuit of something truly transcendental. And so take stock of what you are pursuing. Think for a few minutes about what you're trying to accomplish and what is important to you, what is of value to you. And from that, you can then kind of backtrack and ask yourself, well, if I'm not happy, maybe it's because the things I'm pursuing aren't of a high enough value. If suffering, if hardship, if challenge is inherent to being alive, then at least finding something to go after that is maximally important to you will provide bedrock of meaning for that suffering that you have to go through. Because if you're suffering and it feels like you're suffering too much, then maybe you're not pursuing the right thing. Maybe there's not enough meaning in your life to equate to the amount of suffering that you're going through. I'm not saying that's a universal truth, but I am saying it's worth taking stock of, because it may turn out to be the case that if you reevaluate your values and you realize that what you've been pursuing, what you've been aiming at, it's not it, well, now you've just opened up an entirely new future for yourself. You've opened up an entirely new dimension of existence that may very well change the entire nature of all the suffering that you've ever been through. And that's pretty remarkable. So taking stock of those things, of what is maximally important to you, and this is where I think spirituality and religion are just unbelievable compasses of transformation. You find something that is so transcendental to your brief existence here on this planet as a human being, and they are brief. Just take a moment to think about how quickly time passes. If you're in your teens or 20s or 30s, it seems like, oh yeah, no, I've got plenty of time. Well, think about when you were 5 years old. Think about when you were 10 years old. Think about when you were 14 years old. And think about how much time that really felt like between then and now. And now project that forward. Is 50 really that far off? Is 70 really that far off? So what are you doing now to maximize the time that you have to pursue something that is actually of value to you? These are open questions, and maybe you don't have an answer, but at least the exploration of the question might lead to some profound changes in your life. And this other thing that I want to mention, because this is all geared towards not eliminating suffering, but dealing with the fact that suffering exists. Sometimes it's okay to just acknowledge that things are hard. And acknowledge that life is overwhelming sometimes. And maybe it's okay to be overwhelmed sometimes. And maybe it's okay to take a step back and admit you don't have the answers. Because sometimes there aren't answers. And maybe that's okay too. Whew. That kind of humbling experience in and of itself is very powerful. We like to think that we have answers for everything, and we like to believe that there are answers for everything. That there's nothing that goes without some kind of reason or some kind of purpose. If we could just figure it out, then it wouldn't be such a heavy burden anymore. And most of the time we can. Most of the time there is a reason, or 2,000 reasons. But in that moment of pain and struggle, being okay with the fact that you don't have an answer, being okay with the fact that it just hurts. Sometimes it just hurts, and that's okay, because you've been hurt before. You're going to get hurt again, and you are the thing that endures the hurt. You are the thing that endures the struggle. You make it through. You have made it through. You haven't gotten this far in life without some kind of a struggle or terrible loss or grief. So if you're struggling right now, remember that you have struggled before and you got through and you will get through this also. So yes, being alive is a terrible challenge. Being a human being is a terrible challenge. And God damn it, okay, because denying that fact is setting yourself up for so much of a harder road in the future. But if you acknowledge it now, if you accept it, that life is hard, God, it's hard as hell, well, then maybe that's when you start attuning your vision of what life could be like if you were being attentive to the right kinds of things. Have you put your effort and focus into values that built your character and your internal state of being, and recognize that there's nothing in the external world that's going to make you feel secure? Not in the long run. Because there's nothing stable about the external world. It's always changing, as we are. But you always have the opportunity to create security within your own being. And you can do that through simple breathing techniques, regular meditation, journaling, connecting with your emotions as they are, and experiencing them as they are. You don't need a reason for them. You don't need to explain them, but just to realize, wow, I'm in pain. Wow, this is a real struggle. And this is what my body feels like, to be in pain and to be in a struggle. And it's okay. It's okay to struggle. It's okay that I'm in pain. It's okay that I'm hurting. Because at least I'm here to feel it. And I can accept it, and I can love it. Your internal security begins with your acceptance and compassion for yourself. It begins with acceptance and love for the very thing that is hurting deep inside of you. Because if you can extend love to that's in you, then you're gonna be able to be patient and forgiving and loving of all else that is outside of you. And that's stability, that's security. But it only comes from inside. You can't start with doing that externally to yourself. And that's what people make the mistake of all the time. You get security through control or avoidance. And people avoid everything that they can outside of themselves. They also avoid everything that they can within themselves. And they try to control everything that's outside of them. But that does not work. You only have control of your internal state of being. And if you can create a foundation, a bedrock of security within your own heart and soul and mind, then you can weather any challenge that's outside of you. And you can learn how to deeply, deeply connect to the eternal truth that's inside of you, that is represented by both Buddha and Jesus, though in opposite directions. So that's about all I have this go around. The challenge of being human, the challenge of being alive, is a responsibility that we all have to shoulder. And it's worth it if you do it, and if you do it right, and if you're aiming at something of high importance, of high value, and you choose that value and you choose that aim regardless of the situation and the context that you find yourself in. And maybe that makes all the pain and all the hardship and all the struggle possible, meaningful, profound even. So profound, in fact, that all of a sudden you don't need life to be easy and comfortable, because you've found something even greater than that. You've found purpose. So again, that'll do it for today. Thank you for listening. If this was helpful, if you are interested in more content like this, leave a like, leave a comment below, and let me know what you would like to hear about. And I'd happily explore those topics. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for coming by.